Welcome to Design Notes, the show in which we find out how the games you love get onto your table, with me, Ben Maddox. Today, I'm talking to the designer of Sierra West and Coloma, Jonny Pac. We talk about the importance of reading your contract before you sign it and getting over imposter syndrome. If you have anything you want to say, please leave a comment in the comments section below. And I hope you enjoy the show. So, I'm here with one of the most up-and-coming new designers on the block, and that's Jonny Pac, or Jonny Cantin, or Jonny Pac Cantin. What is your name?
I go by Jonny Pac when I'm doing, art, music, and all those kinds of things. My last name is technically Cantin. Middle name is actually Pac, so I go by Jonny Pac. That's what you'll see on most of my box covers and things at this point too.
So my first question is what I ask everyone, and I start the show off with it, and it's a nice uncomfortable question to get people in the mood. And please don't let your modesty overtake the honesty of your answer. So my first question is, when did you realise that you were good at what you do?
That's kind of a crazy question because I'm never really sure. I'm a very, self-doubting sort of person. So maybe it's one of those things that it's a useful tool to doubt yourself, to try to push yourself a lot. But I have that, I have the confidence to keep trying every day to make art and make games and do things, make music, all this sort of stuff. And obviously I believe in myself enough to do it. But then there's a part of me that's always just wondering why I'm doing it and if I'm doing it well enough, and at what point will I, feel like I'm actually good at what I do. And I'm not sure if that's outside validation or if that's going to be an internal thing, because I haven't reached that point yet, actually.
So I've interviewed you before for my podcast, and you sent me a sort of bio with some notes, and you mentioned imposter syndrome a lot in that, saying, it's something you're afflicted with. Sometimes you just don't feel that you should be around the kind of talent that you're around, right? How do you get over imposter syndrome, and how do you power through and make that negative voice on your shoulder quieter?
I'm not sure. I think there's a few things. I think it's if I look up at what I think is, the best games out there and that sort of stuff, and I might get intimidated, I'll never be able to do that such a thing. I'm not, good enough or smart enough or whatever else, or didn't think of it first. But then there's a lot of games that are very pedestrian and whatever else that are doing okay. And there's that part of you is I could do that, or I could do better, or whatever else. Or you kind of place yourself somewhere in there, and hopefully there's an honest assessment where I can see where I'm sitting with some of this stuff. Even as a musician, I can kind of see where I end and the virtuosos begin, that sort of placement. And I think there's a point where you just feel like you can do what you do well, and it doesn't have to be virtuoso, say with music and stuff. And if you have a voice and you can do something, and there aren't a bunch of holes in it, it's actually just this is this and it's intact, is a pretty good state to get something into. And then if you can just kind of move that good intact thing up the ladder until it gets better and better, I think somewhere it might feel like you're in a good company and this is the real deal. So I have aspirations to get to that point still.
So, you mentioned there you're not quite sure how this feeling of being good will arrive, where it'll arrive from, whether it's inside you or whether it's outside. But whenever I think of the work that I do, I'm an actor, I act on stage when stages are open, and I do this kind of work, and I'm racked with daily self-doubt. I'm often bemused or angered or sometimes, downright depressed when things don't go the way I want them to. And I guess, so how affected are you by the reaction that your work gets? Do you think, are you buoyed? I guess this is a roundabout way of saying, when you get good reviews, do you feel great? And does it give you that impetus to go on and create more stuff?
That's a really interesting question because I'm kind of similar to what you're just describing there, where I'm a little bit of that tortured artist sometimes, and it's funny how sometimes I'll get a really good review or something like that, and there's a part of me that can't completely believe it, and kind of like, yeah, but if they played enough or think about it enough, they'll, something will bring it down. And then when I get the really, fussy bad reviews, there's also a part of me just going like, they missed the point. And so there's like some medium where, regardless if it's super polarized, I kind of pull towards the center to a degree. Um, and so it's kind of in there somewhere. If I get a review and somebody's complaining about a bunch of stuff that was very intentional in a game and they just don't like it, I don't really feel bad about that. I just know it's a mismatch, and I feel bad that they wasted their time, or they got roped into the game, or they spent good money on my game and it wasn't something that would speak to them. And maybe they should have done a little more market research, or maybe their expectations are like, oh, I thought this was going to be a Western sandbox game, and then they realize it's actually a Euro game, but then they realize it's not a crunchy Euro game, it's one that needs social skills, and they get broadsided by something like that. And I feel a little bit bad about that if it's a mismatch of their stuff, but I ultimately know that not every game's not for everybody. And if I can clearly see that this was just a mismatch with this person, then it's not that the game is bad, it's just a bad matching. If I see that it's somebody who I really think is my target audience, like, and it's a miss with them, it's like I see this person's, I don't know, if I look up their BGG top 10 or something, and I see it's like my favorite top games, and all of a sudden they hate my game, I'm feeling like, what did I do to miss the mark for this person? Because I wish they would have liked my game, and that stings a little bit. So it just depends. So yeah, but either way, I think there's part of me, and maybe it's healthy or not, that pulls that stuff towards the middle, and I don't get super destroyed by the negative stuff, and I don't really get super elated when I get even a really good review. But it's in there in the middle somewhere.
So, I said at the top of the show that you're one of the sort of up and coming names. People are starting to talk about you now. You've had Coloma, you've had Sierra West, Lions of Lydia has just dropped. And, I happen to know from speaking to you outside of an interview situation that your journey to where you're currently standing within the game world has been checkered, to say the least. So how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, so it's depending on where you look, you'll find a little bit of my backstory and how I got into it. So, in a nutshell, I got into gaming and Euro games. Especially, I wasn't really like a Magic the Gathering player and an RPG player, video gamer that turned Euro gamer at some point. I was kind of just musician, hipster, doing this other stuff, and then Euro games hit me, and I was suddenly hooked on this thing, right? And so I kind of came into it in the mid 2000s through people showing it to me, and I really loved the stuff, and I started collecting the games. I was near Games of Berkeley, and so I'd go in there and see what the manager's choice was, or see what the Spiel des Jahres winners were, or whatever. Building a nice collection and start hosting game nights, and that in itself was felt kind of creative. I was kind of known as the nerd herder, and I'd bring people together in my small town to play these Euro games, which were in my area weren't really well known outside of Catan. And I didn't really have aspirations to be a designer. I was composing music, I was doing art, I was running an art gallery, doing all this other stuff. And I even think people are like, "Oh, you should make your own games." And I was just like, "Oh, no, no! Look at these numbers. I couldn't figure out these numbers and these games and things. It takes the Dr. Knizia's. He's a math genius. It takes that to do this, and I'm just this crazy artist. I couldn't." Um, and so then at some point, I actually met some game designers who had some stuff that was in the pipeline that was going to come out with the company. And it was, Ameritrash stuff or party game stuff, but it was still game design. And I saw a little bit of how the sausage was made. And I realized, and one thing is, I didn't know that games started broken and were play tested until they became nice things. Like, no game really just comes out perfect. And I think there's a thing with artists and stuff is they'll go into hibernation behind their curtain and they'll do their painting and they get no peer review, and then they bring it up and they unveil the curtain and they go, ta-da, it's done. And somebody shouldn't come up there and be like, I think the yellow would be more fun if it was over here. The artists don't respond to stuff like that. They want to just show you, this is me, it's 100% done, and there it is, unless they're in college getting critique. But the working artists won't do that. And so the idea that there's this thing that you start to make, and then it becomes robust after you bring it to your audience and they beat it up over and over and over, and it gets good from that. And that's the only way that these things get good. That process was kind of mind blowing. It's like workshopping, songs that aren't really like sticking with an audience, and you kind of rework them, you change the tempo, and eventually down the road, you see the audience starts to respond to this jam that first time you played it wasn't that good. So that I think lowered the bar, that I felt like I can try to make a broken game too and work on it until it's good. So that helped me get in with it, and then those people I fell in with also knew their boss, and they were able to get me a spot where I brought my sell sheet, my prototype, and pitched my game to them. And my first game got signed by this company kind of right out the gates, and I was so new to all this, I just signed up right away and said, "Yeah, let's do this." And the rest is kind of history. It turned out to be a very nightmarish situation where just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong, and so in the end, it kind of made me feel like I needed to do this over again and maybe step aside from this project. So at the time, I was actually being published under Jonathan Pac Cantin, my full name, and I rebranded myself to my musician lingo name, Jonny Pac, and self-published Hangtown, based on my local history of the town I live in, which later turned into Coloma, which is a nearby town of same gold rush history. To kind of rebrand from there. And when I was then pitching to other publishers and things down the road, I actually didn't use the original game as part of my resume. It was on BGG if people really wanted to dig and find it, and they could, and whatever else. But basically just reinvented myself as, here's my website, here's my games, I've got this, I made this one game by myself, I sold it out of my garage, whatever. And I want to, create these other types of games. Stylistically, that first game isn't something remotely close to what I make now anyway. So I don't really feel like some people have asked, hey, could you get the rights back to that first game? Could you redo it? Would you redo it? And I think it's kind of like one of those things where I play a different style of music now. I play a different style of game now, and I design a different style of game. So there's a lot of me is okay with letting that go. Besides the very negative history that it has. My one little word of advice to new designers is just a lot of designers tell me, like, someday I would just love to see my name on a game box. And there should be a little caveat there saying that you'd love to see your name on a game box with a good game in it that you're proud of, and make sure that that's what the situation is. Otherwise, you might want to change your name so it's on a different box. So there you go.
So, you've got Sierra West, you've got Coloma, and you're from this area of California, the Gold Rush area. So what's the reason that you design games set in this place? Is it just because you had those ideas at the time, or do you feel like an affinity to the area and you want to represent it in games?
So when I was working on my first Gold Rush game, it didn't have a Gold Rush theme right away, and I was kind of struggling to find a theme for it. I had the moving parts, I had the central mechanism, which was, if a bunch of players do the same thing, it's not as good as if you go and do your own little thing. And I was actually sitting in the downtown Placerville Hangtown parking lot, just sitting there talking with a game buddy friend, and just like, what should it be? And we were throwing these ideas, and they're all kind of crazy. And he was like, well, what if it's this? I said, this? He says, yeah, the Gold Rush is right here. We've got all this history. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're literally sitting on the gold mine of stuff. And so that kind of went down the rabbit hole of going, okay, I'm going to learn even more about the Gold Rush history, because being around it, you learn all sorts of things, Sutter's Mill and all this stuff, and you just kind of take it for granted. Oh, it's a tourist town. People come here to see the gold stuff. They do gold panning events in the summer and all that. But I actually went a little further and went and looked at what all the historic buildings were, because the game had a lot of buildings in it, and I wanted to represent those actual buildings and not just be generic, Western town with cowboy guy. It was more in depth than actually any of the other games I did after that. But the theme I found lent itself to lots of things that were fun game-wise, and so I really enjoyed that. And that led to Coloma, which is a reimplementation with a less historic but whimsical artwork version of it. And while I was working on that, I was working on some other games, and A Fistful of Meeples was again kind of based on that local ideas. I was playing some Mancala, and then I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you took a Mancala board, which has the rows of pits, and then you take a typical Western town with the dirt road in the center, and you have a two rows of buildings doing things, and instead of dropping off lots of little bits of whatever it is and Mancala, it would be meeples, cowboy meeples, and then they do stuff. I didn't know what they do, but I drew up a little board like that and just started moving stuff around. And again, that theme just felt fun. And I started thinking, well, what would cowboys do if they're on either side of the town from each other? It's like, oh, well, that'd be a good place for a little gunfight. And maybe there's a place where they can go mining and a place where they can do these different little things. And so that led to that. And Sierra West was actually about the Donner Party, which is, some people know, it's basically a bunch of pioneers who are trying to make it into early California and got stuck in a terrible blizzard and resorted to eating their saddlebags, their animals, and eventually the dead. So that game had a much darker theme than what it was. And the publisher said, I don't think our European partners are necessarily going to know this history and find it very amusing. And so could you change it and so it had more of a generic theme or seasonal theme or something else? Can you make maybe some modules that do different stuff? So, okay, so we did, like the Gold Rush was one of the modules, and one of based on harvesting apples, which there's a big apple crop in this area that's known as Apple Hill. So that kind of made it in. And so it kind of trickled into that, but I didn't set out with a goal of making Western games per se. I set out with the goal of just making thematically informed Euro games, and the local surroundings have lent themselves really well to that. And I like the theme, and I'm always willing to dip back into it. But I'm also totally willing to explore other things like Lions of Lydia. I've never been to where ancient Lydia is. I've just, learned about it through books and things like that.
So, can you tell us your game design process? How do you get from, an idea about the Donner Party to a playable game that I put on the table and fail to score points at?
Yeah. So I like to think of it as synthesis. I like to take ideas and kind of improvise and push them around until something clicks. And so I feel like musicians have like a vocabulary. The more songs you listen to, you play, you digest, it's much easier to create original music if you have that kind of foundation. And so I think from playing a lot of games and admiring a lot of games and designers and their aesthetics and following their, much like I do with musicians, I might listen to Miles Davis very early things all the way to his late career and see what he did as an artist. And sometimes I'll do with a game designer, I'll get early Stefan Feld games and then his latest one and see how he's evolved as a designer and see little things like that resonate with me, and try to absorb that into my vocabulary. And I might think of ways of taking a thematic element and a behavioral economic element and some game design things I just know and like, and kind of mash them all together until those parameters feel like there's something good there. And so it's kind of a creative improvisation, and I don't think one good idea is ever enough. It usually takes like this good idea and another good idea, and if those things join and create an even better idea, that's when I think there's something there, and I get excited. And it might be building a mountain of cards into the Donner Party and tucking them into this little thing, and eating meeples to get your food back, how it started off, and all these things, and they evolve obviously by the time an idea happens. It might not even have that thematic element that drove it from the beginning, but it does end up being something in the end, which hopefully is good. And so, yeah, so it's very improvisational, but with improvisational doesn't mean it's just pure Calvin ball design. It means that you have a like structured improvisation, like almost like a jazz musician thing, where you know certain segments instead of a granular level. You start to think in measures and bars and phrases and how you want to layer those things together.
And so, you are not just a game designer, right? You have carved yourself a sort of professional life in the game industry by wearing many hats, not least corduroy cowboy ones. So what other sort of stuff do you do in the game industry, and how is that different from, the pure sort of coming up with ideas for games?
Yeah, I guess the standout thing is that I'm a game developer as well. So instead of just being an ideas guy that just, I've got a bright light bulb goes off and you hand it to a company and then you hope to just see it, come out of the black box as this final product. I kind of walk the thing all the way to the finish line. I do that more so with my own games now than I used to, and then I also do that um, as a freelancer for other companies. So the royalties game is a long game. So you make a game and you pitch it, and it goes into all this stuff, and like 3 years later, you might see a little bit of money for it, and that's a very, very long time to wait for any sort of income, and it's not unless you get an evergreen or something like that, it's not going to keep happening, right? So the idea would be have some games come out, have the royalties kind of snowball and trickle in as they do, with the hopes that there's a evergreen, something that gets reprinted a lot that sustains itself. But the development work is something I can do as a freelancer, where I can either charge hourly or by the job, and get paid by the month or whatever else it is. So there's the ability to live paycheck by paycheck on development work. And it's also part of the process that I realize I like. I'm one of those play testers. I'll play test somebody's game, and I'll see my lights will just be going off with, here's some ways to refine these things. And streamlining and editing is something I like to do with games, because I like it when I see a game that's well streamlined and put together in a good way, and has good like ergonomics, and the UX and UI design is good. Things are clear, and I see a game like that and I go, oh, this is really good. And so I try to take those examples and then see a game that's otherwise a good game, but maybe it's messy, or it's missing something, or there's a mechanic that was kind of phoned in instead of a contemporary way of doing something, and try to give it that facelift and bring it there. And also be in touch with the graphic designers and artists and see if we can synthesize all these things to try to meet the publisher's goal of what their product should be, along with what the designer's vision is, along with the limitations of what kind of market we're dealing with, whether that's expanding it into a big Kickstarter thing or trying to compress it into the most affordable retail product possible, right? So those are things I do, and I enjoy that part of it a lot. And the background in art and art direction and aesthetics and things like that, I think, has helped to be able to look at something and say, this even just feels right when you look at it this way, from upside down backwards on the table. And if I right-handed or left-handed and pass my arm over, I'm not going to knock a whole bunch of stuff over. I mean, little things like that don't always get thought about, especially in this era of tabletop simulator testing. The games still need to be played on the real table to be tested as products, and I think that's important. That's something that I still do.
I mean, so, you're essentially, your development work and that sort of stuff is a way of making sure you have a regular income rather than, being on the royalty bandwagon. What's the sort of end game, if I can say that, sort of, would you like to continue to be a developer and to do that stuff, or would you like purely to live from your design work and focus 100% of your professional life on designing games?
I think there's going to be a sweet mix somewhere in there, and I'm starting to say no to more jobs as a developer, where at first I was just trying to get basic practice gigs and do the best I could given the circumstances. But I'm referring friends and other developers or designers to take over things that I just don't think are in my wheelhouse, because what I do is pretty specific. And so if somebody says, hey, I want to do this cooperative IP game that's for it's immediately, I'm just going to go, I might be able to fight my way through it and do a lot of research and make it okay, or I can call up somebody I know that's going to do a great job and would love to do this from the get-go. So that helps. And I feel like if I develop I'm trying to, sometimes there's like a game I'll play and it's like, oh my gosh, please let me develop this. This is so good. And there's so many great ideas here. I would be honored to walk this to the finish line with the designer and the publisher. That's the kind of gig I want to take right now. So I've recently started working on something with Alley Cat Games. It's a new designer. He's got this game. I played it with him. I was like, I don't know where you came out with this idea. This is so good. I'd be honored to develop this with you, and and you're definitely, I want to play second fiddle. I don't want to change too much of this game. I think you've really got something cool here. And he was like, oh my gosh, you're one of my favorite designers. I love Coloma. I can't believe we're having this call, and I can't believe you like my game. I'm like, well, that's cool, but your game is really good. And that's the kind of gig I want to do, where there's a lot of mutual respect, and we're both really excited about whatever it's going to turn into next.
So, I would say that you're someone who's on, not the bottom, but certainly on an upward curve. You've had the last couple of years have seen your games coming out and people recognizing you as a name within the industry. So, how does it feel? You know, you get the UPS guy come round, he rings the bell, you take the parcel, you cut off the sellotape, you open it, and inside you see this beautiful piece of art with a title and cellophane wrapped around it, and at the bottom you see your name. Does it still give you an electric thrill?
Well, I like to say yes. So I just recently got to open up Lines of Lydia, which just is fulfilling with Kickstarter right now. So I got a case of those. I got to pop it open and see the gorgeous metal coins and cloth bag, and have that like kind of holy moment where you got the tape and see the box lid and get to see it. I love seeing the punch boards. I don't know what it is about that, just popping out the tokens that otherwise I spent hours cutting, and cards that I cut before and taking the sell off that. So there is some stuff, and that fresh game smell is cool. I think my first experience was really difficult because I was kind of devastated at what I saw with that. So there's a certain amount of anxiety that I have with these, hoping that it's going to be okay when that opens up. So when I first see it, I'm not quite elated yet until I kind of like inspect it a little bit and take that deep breath and be like, okay, this is good or mostly good. And see where it's at, and then get excited about it. But yeah, it's definitely cool. It's fun to see. Like I saw somebody on the Twitter today at a Calyx shelf, and there's a whole little cubby that just had my games in it, and I was like, I almost filled this guy's cubby up, and that was kind of a good little moment to see that there. So I'm always glad when people enjoy the games.
So, what do you have coming out in the future then? What Jonny Pac hotness can we enjoy?
So next off the boat is Merchant's Cove, which is a co-design with Carl Van Osteren and Drake Villarreal. So that's, as far as I know, it's going through customs in the States right now, and I'm seeing some review copies, actual final copies, being unboxed and things as of today, even. So I think we'll be seeing that. Even by the time the show airs, we'll probably see more of that out there, which is exciting. That's been a very long process with some delays. So we're excited to see the outcome. It's an ambitious project with very, very asymmetrical player powers and an otherwise economic game. Uh, Paired with that is a game I developed called Drawn to Adventure. And I helped work through that product, which is a roll and write sort of game. It went from being on paper sort of thing like normal to being on a dry erase flipboard where you play through these different maps and scenarios. Um, so I did a lot of work on that one. It hasn't gotten a lot of buzz yet, but I'm excited to see what people think of that. And I'm glad that the roll and write trend hasn't completely, petered out. In fact, I think it's going strong as ever, and that product will fit in nicely with the way things are going. So I'm excited to see that. I did work on a Glenmore expansion in the box that's coming out of the Highland Games, which I kind of pitched on the Highland Games, which ended up being the name of the whole product. And within the Highland Games product, the Sticks and Stones expansion is the one that I created, which is about the caber toss and chucking rocks and all that sort of thing. So it's got a little sideboard, and it's kind of a mini game that you play along to enhance your Glenmore experience, which is one of my favorite old Euro games, and I really love what Funtails did with it. And I'm honored to have gotten to put a little piece in there and see my name on the cover. I mean, it's imposter syndrome seeing Atoma Factory and Rutger Dorn and then my name there. It's like, ooh, one of these doesn't fit. um, so those are the things popping up right away. Endless Winter, which I've done a tremendous amount of work on, and the expansions for, is coming out this winter appropriately. I'm working on that right now, so we'll be able to see more and more of that as it kind of comes forth. And then there's a few more projects. I'm working as a developer on a game called Solar Sphere, which is a neat dice placement game that'll be on Kickstarter pretty soon. And it's been really fun working with those guys on it, and will definitely something to check out. And a couple unannounced projects, or quiet ones. One's called Unconscious Mind, which is Fantasia's next game. And that's a collaborative game with mostly I'm mostly playing developer, but I'm going to be doing some actual design work on it too. So I'm credited as a designer on that one, and it's kind of around the Freudian era of psychoanalysis, and you're running a clinic of sorts as a player, and it has some really cool action selection programming mechanisms that I'm going to help be reworking, and we have some really good artists working on it. It's kind of a neat pairing of Andrew Bosley and Vincent Dutrade's artwork is actually being synthesized into one game, which sounds crazy if you know both those artists and the difference of their styles, but we're kind of dealing with the internal landscape and then the external landscape, and each of those artists kind of dominates one of those areas, and then there's some areas where they feather over, and that's kind of the art direction on that one, which is pretty exciting.
Great. So, imagine you're at a convention and it's the evening and you've been invited out to a bar for a drink in the evening to relax, and you're coming back from the loo and you overhear a table of people and you hear your name and they're talking about your games. And so you sidle into a corner and you eavesdrop. What do you hope they're saying?
Well, I hope they're saying good things, of course. It'd be nice to be recognized for some innovation because I like to think that everything I work on, I want to see some new little something, whether that's taking a bunch of tried and true mechanics and mashing them together in a new way, or something that's generally been athematic and has been put into something that is thematic, maybe stuff like that. I'd like to be known as kind of maybe like a no nonsense designer. I really admire people like Phil Walker Harding for there's just no exceptions in their games. They're just such clean designs, and I feel like he can grasp lots of concepts that were rough and then refine them into something. But his games tend to be kind of like that Gateway Plus style game, and I'd love to see him make like a big giant Euro at some point. I kind of want to make the bigger games part of the time, and things smaller like Fistful and Lions the other half of the time. But I do want to make some of those bigger games, but I want to see if I can maintain that level of no nonsense. And I feel like I've seen that a few times. Like I really admire the game Pulsar 2849. It's a big sprawling game, but there's just almost no nonsense, and it's very, very, very clean rule set. And that's the kind of thing I have aspirations to do. And I would love to be, if somebody says, when I first saw this, it looked like a lot, but as soon as you look at it, it makes sense. And it's actually easy to pick up. And we didn't have to look at the rule book once after the beginning. It just made sense. We can just get into the game itself, and there's a lot there to discover, but it wasn't just like this big cognitive load of drudgery of rules and clarifications and somebody on BGG every 2 minutes trying to figure out what actually happens. Just like a robust, clean Euro game experience that's thematically informed.
So, my last question is, why is gaming good?
Well, I would like to say board gaming because that's probably more what I know as tabletop gaming. I really think the social contract and the ritual of what you do when you play these games makes people better people. And I even think that's true if the game is not competitive, not cooperative. It can be a competitive. It can even be a cutthroat game. It could even be thematically a war game or something like this. And I still think the people are better people because they came out and played the thing with each other. And I think that has to do with the fact that there's table etiquette. You're in close proximity with people. Well, used to be. But every game is kind of a co-op in the sense that we are all agreeing to work with these otherwise arbitrary rules. We're going to create a microcosm, a magic circle that this is what happens. I'm a bit of an existentialist, so I think, in a cold, uncaring universe, we're creating local meaning for some people to come together and get invested in the outcome of this little microcosm. And I think that engages people who otherwise maybe are disengaged, or maybe it's a good distraction from something. And it teaches things like even the simplest idea of like turn taking is a very respectful thing. It's kind of like letting somebody talk, letting somebody take their action. And, people don't like to have the alpha player, dominate what they're doing. People like to do that. And it's nice to let them do it. And if somebody's being rude and playing, an app when it's not their turn, or gets up every single time, or whatever else, it feels disrespectful because it's almost like, yeah, I'm taking my turn, but I want to be listened to. I want to be heard when I take my turn. I want my turn to have an effect on the game that you care about and see what I do, whether you're going to exploit that move or not. But I think it's in a sense a spatial conversation that's happening on a table in a shared invested area. And I think all those things just makes people better people. It connects people to people. It's the opposite of being in a car and cutting somebody off as traffic. Instead, it's arriving at the door to the restaurant at the same time. And that same person you cut off on the freeway, you would gladly open the door for and let them in. Be after me, after you, that sort of thing. So I think that's all what comes with it. And I think when we get into some of the weeds with people saying, "Oh, this theme is endorsing some subtle thing," it's maybe it is. Maybe we could do better at the themes. But in the long run, I think what we're really doing is making people come together and treat each other good at tables, and that is going to affect how they treat their neighbor and the next person down the line, and how they greet somebody on the phone, because it's enriching their lives. And that's the important part. That metagame is the important part to me.
Excellent. Well, Jonny Pac, thank you so much for giving over your time, and I look forward to playing your games in the future.
Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. One thing is wherever I am on that ladder, it feels really cool to be on your podcast, now on your show, and so I'm really honored to be here.